So in terms of laughing and crying, how many of you voted last Tuesday? How many of you voted more than once last Tuesday? I voted for Palladino 4 times. It was awesome. What? It was my fourth vote that counted. Anyways, all right. So, as people who play trivia learned, sort of the birthplace democracy was founded in 1215 when King John of England signed the Magna Carta, and here we are, 995 years later, and democracy's still kicking. So that was a long time ago. That was the past of democracy, but let's learn a little about the future of democracy with Ben. Big round of applause for Ben.
Hello. So, I don't know about you guys, but my experience with democracy isn't that great. Well, we'll have to wait. Like I was saying, I don't know how many of you guys are happy with the way politics is going these days? Like, boos, because most people would boo. According to the polls, anyway, it's 2 to 3 against 2 against 1. And when I think about politics, I think about basically old people making bad decisions. So it occurred to me that our system. Even prior to the Magna Carta, it started much earlier. It was like, our system is very similar to the Roman Republic, which is 2,500 years old. They had separation of powers, they had the same voting system we do, and even their political parties look strikingly similar to ours. And here's an image of Romans voting, and the history isn't great. Like, we had the Romans, and then the monarchs, and then America. Well, I mean, you can get more specific than that, but what I want from my politics is I want a politics that's more like the progress of technology. I want a politics like Viking, actually. So in Viking, at first, they didn't have pedals. They didn't realize that they were necessary, so they wore out their boots. But then they put pedals on, and they said, look how fast I can go with these giant wheels. And then finally, gears were invented, and they attached them to bicycles. I want that progress from my politics. I want continuous evolution. And we don't get that. We get, the Romans in America, and a few other examples. So there's a reason for this, I think. So technology has individual adoption and individual innovation, and governance requires a revolution to innovate, and you need to agree nationally to make any new policy. So it's a massive burden, so you end up with very little opportunity for new opportunities. So the question is, can we make politics individual? Can we make politics more like Viking rather than this kind of stuff? So there's a separate sort of thing that's going on, which is technology is transitioning things from branding to individual decisions. So here we have some movies from Apple, from the iTunes, from the trailer side, and you see the branding of the movies. You see movies branded by the actor that's involved. You see movies branded by the previous examples from the series. And that's branding, that's the group communication for people who might be interested in that stuff. And there are new examples, like as you have more information available, you can make individual judgments, you can make individual communications. So with Netflix, they have ratings that are based on your preferences and your history and other people's similar preferences. So we can start to communicate on an individual basis. Likewise, in education, your college communicates to your employer that you are part of this group that's distinguished. Right? Ooh, I agree. How much better is it if we had an individual track record? This is my profile from GitHub, where I have my history history of my work that I've done in real, meaningful, in a meaningful profile. So employers get a lot more out of this than from my education.
No, they don't.
Come take a look, right? So, and the implications are pretty dramatic. The implications mean the difference between paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for an education versus taking it on yourself and making a general charge. So what if we could do this with politics? With politics, we have these brands. We have these Democrats and Republicans, and that doesn't say very much to me, personally. There's all these individuals, there's hundreds of them in DC, and what do they all stand for? All sorts of different things. And so, friends of mine and I started this site, and we started looking at individual politicians and what they individually stood for. So we used their standings and their histories, legislative actions and so on, interest group ratings, to show, to track all the way back to their ultimate standing in real policy matters. And we have lots of different ways of judging politicians, far more expressive than what Democrat and Republican says. I mean, you could read the list, there are dozens of them. And we started looking at how can we communicate the individuality of the politicians. And one way we can do this is by taking all of these different causes, all of these different ratings from these different kinds of standings, and plotting them all together. So here's an example. This is a radar chart, and there are some 30-something examples there. And you can look at different politicians and see their differences by comparing the way their standing shows in this chart. So these are the senators of New York. And this is the representative for this building, among others. And you can start to see that among the Democrats are different, and among the Republicans, the same is true. Really, what if we could look at them individually and get rid of the bad ones and keep the good ones from whatever party? So I asked this question in my description that there's all this money spent on campaigns, and can we get past that? And I think this is all about rational ignorance. So in the context where nobody has, how do we know about the one person who's the politician running that you're voting for? We don't have that much information. So given all the effort required to gather that information, instead we vote for the party. But we can, with easy enough tools, we can vote for the one who actually represents our interests. And then we overcome rational ignorance and we become empowered. So part of this tool that we made, Vote Reports, walks you through and you select where you're from, and you answer questions about your perspective, and we combine them all together to make a personal score, which is much better informed than your party standing. So I think that's the beginning of the idea of taking political problems and turning them into technological problems, because technological problems, they happen in their individual innovation and individual adoption, and we can iterate and improve and evolve much more quickly than we can in policy matters. So you can ask where this is going, and there's this quote that said, and people who like democracy talk like this quote because it says, "Isn't democracy so great? We don't know a better way." But to me, it says democracy is kind of terrible, right? And shouldn't we be looking for better options? I mean, if we can say so many bad things about democracy, we should find better ways. And an example of this, which I think is really interesting, is called delegable proxy. So this is a form of government that wasn't possible before the internet. Basically, it's direct democracy in the base case, but every individual has the power to vote and can delegate that to any other individual. And you build hierarchies of representation by choice, by opting into a certain representative. And at some level, someone has enough representation, has a constituency, and it's not a constituency defined by a district that's gerrymandered, but it's a constituency defined by choice. And those politicians make the decisions, right? Well, the funny thing is, voters making decisions through a system like vote reports approximates this system of proxy voting and delegation. It's voters delegating their choice of who to vote for to the interest groups who are scrutinizing the votes of the individual politicians. So you're getting a much more informed intermediate section of this representation, and ultimately the interest groups can be hard on the politicians without the voters being knowledgeable about what the politicians are doing. I think that's really interesting. So the general idea here is that there are, like, we don't take politics that seriously in the technology community, and I think part of the reason is we don't take seriously the idea that technology can fix politics and can solve political problems. And my message is that it can and it will, and we're working on it and we need your help. So if you're interested, come talk to me.